Now that the original Game Boy review series has been paused for a bit, see the channel update if you don't know why I'm not currently releasing those reviews, I've thoroughly enjoyed getting stuck into the Game Boy Color library recently. It's something I'm less familiar with, as it was not quite as large a part of my childhood as the original was. We gotta admit though, as pretty as some of these games look, there are a fair few mediocre titles to plow through. Same as before, sure, but the channel could absorb them back when I was doing 5 reviews a week. Now I've been down to just a Monday vid for the past month or so, and for those of you who watched this week, I'm sure you'll agree that when we hit upon something like a shogi title, the reduced content gets spread very thinly indeed. To that end, I've decided there's no time better to start looking at the proper next generation of Nintendo handhelds, the Game Boy Advance. Here's a console that definitely did capture my attention when I was younger, and it's virtually unanimously agreed upon that the GBA's library is much stronger than the colors, and even rivals the DMGs for star power, if not for longevity. And if we're jumping into one new console, heck, why not go for broke and kick the Advance series off too? That's exactly what I'm gonna do, starting next week. You'll be glad to know that the launch titles are way better this time around, and in fact there are way more of them, so I can't wait to get stuck in. While I am more familiar off the bat with the GBA than the GBC, there's still a ton of games I've never even seen before. So I thought it'd be an interesting experiment to have a look at what I consider my favourite Game Boy Advance games at this point in time, 2024, with no evidence or research save what I can remember playing as a teenager, then periodically come back to this list as I discover more and see what gets kicked out. Now, before you decide to have a sad at me in the comments there, Trevor, I can't stress enough that I have not researched this list. It's simply the best ones I've played so far. I might even be wrong about these. Some of them I might not have touched since the mid-2000s. Look, we've all seen 1001 quote-unquote definitive top 10 game lists, yada yada yada, although how it could be definitive unless you have actually reviewed every single one, I don't know. So, as a change of tact, here's the top 10 GBA games I pulled from the top of the dome piece, blew the dust off, and told you about for some reason. 10. Fire Emblem. Probably the first turn-based strategy game I properly played. I was a little too young to really understand how Shining Force worked back in the Mega Drive days. This is one of the rare cases I can think of where a game single-handedly got me hooked on an entire genre. Brutally hard as it might have been, even so, I could not get enough of it. My overriding memory is getting super mad when my supposed crack-shot archers missed from 2 tiles away, again, and I know for a fact I never came close to completing it, but now I'm no longer an angsty teenager with the attention span of a cold cup of coffee. I'd no doubt enjoy it much more. Nine. Pinball Challenge Deluxe. Yeah, you would never have guessed in a million years I'd feature this one. But look, I didn't have a ton of games, alright? Having said that, I don't know anyone else who even played this. The only reason I got it back then was because I was obsessed with pinball fantasies way back in the Amiga days. Olaf Gustafsson composed 2 of what are probably the best soundtracks in all of video games. Okay, maybe I'm the only person who thinks so, but they're certainly criminally ignored in such conversations. Anyway, this was an absolutely perfect port of both Pinball Fantasies and Pinball Dreams, which were early 90s masterpieces that you could now play in the car. And just try and take that cartridge off me, I dare you. Eight. Golden Sun. I've recently been playing this phenomenal RPG again on the Switch Online thingy, and it's as captivating now as it was back in the day. A little text-heavy perhaps, but the gin-infused combat system and the overworld puzzles, not to mention a belting soundtrack, does not let you put this down. I never got to the sequel, so I'm desperate to make it that far. Remakes when? 7. Lord of the Rings. When I looked this up, I found that there's actually quite a few of these. I couldn't remember exactly which one it was that I had. I think it was Two Towers, as I seem to recall Helm's Deep was in the story, but god did I sink hours into this game. Nothing super revolutionary in terms of gameplay, combat, or anything like that. In fact, it reminds me a fair bit of Diablo or something of that nature. You could play as a bunch of different characters, and unusually for a movie tie-in, it actually followed the plot really inventively. The short loops of soundtrack played incessantly might get annoying, but then Howard Shore can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned. It came out at the perfect time too, to capture the zeitgeist generated by the films, and was thankfully really good as well. Six. Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. I never asked for this game for my birthday or anything, not being a huge Mario fan by that point, but I had to concede that Nintendo just did not release bad Mario games back then. They probably don't now either, I don't know. I hear this is being remade, or has been remade, or something. Is it any good? All I know is I spent way more time than I should bopping along with the bros doing that daft little dance of theirs. Five. Metroid Zero Mission. Metroid games always seem to have an age between them, with there only really being 5 mainline entries in the franchise since the NES days. However, there's a true healthy dose of supplements. The Prime series obviously, but handhelds have had a couple of staggeringly good remakes. Samus Returns looked majestic in 3D, but even before that, we had a modernization of said NES classic. It was every bit as powerful in 2004 as the original must have been in 1986. Four. Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Just called Castlevania around these parts where I come from, I didn't actually realise it had a subtitle until quite recently. Circle of the Moon is a way cooler name, you gotta admit, and it was this game, not Symphony of the Night, that introduced me to the new Metroid slant these Vania titles were taking. A franchise I already loved was all of a sudden so much better. It was no longer just a platformer, it was an adventure. Three. Metroid Fusion. Metroidvanias really came into their own on the Advance, and this true Part 4 of the Metroid franchise introduced some fabulous new game mechanics, utilising the new button layout wonderfully, creating a super captivating, thoroughly engrossing game that has one of the most perfect difficulty curves I can think of. Two. Pokemon Generation 3. A huge Pokemon fan from day one, it's fair to say that I was a smidge underwhelmed when Gen 2 came out, in that Gold and Silver never really felt like much of a step forward. Sure, the console limitations had a bit to do with that, and retrospectively they're still blummin' brilliant games. When Ruby and Sapphire hit the shelves, however, the series felt so fresh, so vital, so en vogue again. I put hundreds and hundreds of hours into Emerald. Then, of course, Fire Red and Leaf Green took us right back to where it all started. I'm by no means an expert anymore, having only really touched some of the later gens in passing, but I'll bet dollars to Diglets it's not entirely inaccurate to say Game Freak were at the absolute top of their game with Gen 3. One, Castlevania, Aria of Sorrow. As a colossal Castlevania fanboy, you might think it's weird that there's only one spot left, but two Castlevanias untouched. I've picked Aria of Sorrow for a few important reasons. One, to this day, it is my favourite GBA game. Two, Soma Cruz is my absolute heart. Three, I love the DS sequel Dawn of Sorrow as well. Four, that soundtrack. A bloody soundtrack. I could give you 100 reasons, but 5, well, I've somehow never played Harmony of Dissonance, although once I do, I'm sure it'll find its way onto this list. This is one of the greatest games I've ever played on any console. The soul-infusing mechanic is genius, providing you with so many different combat options. The physics feel basically perfect. Even if you'd never touched a platformer before, you'd absolutely get this straight away. And Aria of Sorrow for me sort of sits in that realm of how I describe Tetris in the original Game Boy series. A game that right from the off I'm going to hang my hat on, saying that it's probably right up there when all's said and done. So yeah, I'm aware there are many games I'm missing. I haven't even touched any Zelda titles, but rest assured we'll get to them. We'll periodically revisit this list and see what gets bumped off or even bumped up. The series will probably be chronological again, haven't fully decided yet, but if there's anything I really need to check out right now, for God's sakes, let me know.